I want to welcome everyone to Straight Science. This is an evening science series put on by UAF Northwest Campus here in Nome, and also UAF Alaska Sea Grant. And this is the home office these days, especially now. Know that the Bering Strait region is having a big push with the COVID at the moment. I wanted to let everybody know that Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant, we serve the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Yupik, Inupiaq, and St. Lawrence Island Yupik peoples. And we welcome you all to the Bering Strait region. Again, if we have a caller, as far as a getting in line, a caller will get priority due to the digital divide. I think we'll hold questions unless the Coast Guard says otherwise. We'll hold questions until the end. And we have three. I'm very excited tonight. We have three Coast Guard here. We have Captain Jason Brennell, Chief of Enforcement for District 17 for all of Alaska. Captain Phil Thorne, who is the Arctic Program Specialist for Alaska District 17. And Dave Seris, a waterways management expert. So we're really grateful to the Coast Guard. Tonight, we're going to hear about Arctic 2021, what kind of happened. And since the pandemic has started, really the Bering Strait region has just seen a big uptick of multinational military vessels, honestly, and other military activities. So it's a very interesting time for us here. So we're really interested to hear about Arctic Shield 2021. We're really thankful you want to talk to us a little bit about Arctic Shield 2022. And also having Dave Seris and Phil Thorne, such a wide range of experts here to answer our questions about the border. Know that in the Bering Strait region right now, it's January 19th, and we have several vessels right now. And maybe, I don't know if you guys are going to address that, but hopefully you might. We have several vessels in the strait that are quite large, and we don't normally see traffic in January, but this is the new thing. If you have a burning question and you can't wait, because like me, you might forget what you were asking about, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little chat, and it's a little bubble and it'll say chat. Click on that and you can text. So you can write in, I'll be monitoring the chat box. If there's anything that needs to be taken care of, please let me know. And also throw in your questions because we'll get to them at the end. All right, with that, welcome to Straight Science. And I think Captain Phil Thorne, you're leading off?
Yeah, all right. I am. Thank you, Gay.
Do we have the slides?
I think we're actually not going to present the slides until Captain Brennell talks, so I won't be using any for my part.
All right. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Gay, for the introduction. So as Gay said, I'm Phil Thorne. I work here in Juneau for Rear Admiral Moore on the 17th Coast Guard District staff. That's the regional Coast Guard organization for Alaska. Joining me tonight are Captain Jason Brennell and Mr. Dave Seris. They both work for Rear Admiral Moore as well here in Juneau. Captain Brennell directs our law enforcement and security missions, and he's going to talk to you here tonight about the work that we're doing offshore with our largest cutters and aircraft along the border with Russia. And then Dave Seris works our waterway management issues here in Juneau along some long experience. And he's going to talk about trends in vessel traffic through the Bering Strait and how the Coast Guard looks at that. And to start, I'm actually going to talk about the Arctic and Western Alaska Coast Guard activities that we did for 2021 and what we're going to do, what we're emphasizing for 2022. I'll say first that we brand all of those activities that we do in Western Alaska and in the U.S. Arctic as Arctic Shield. That's useful for us to talk about what are disparate activities as one thing. So I can, just a little introduction for myself. I first came up to Alaska 30 years ago with the Coast Guard. I came up on a ship, and I certainly was home as soon as I got here. And I spent much of my career working here in Alaska, both on ships and on shore, all through the state. So when we talk about what the Coast Guard is, activities and missions that the Coast Guard is doing in Western Alaska and in the Arctic, I think the broadest answer that I could give to kind of start us off would be that we're providing for the safety and security of coastal residents and mariners in the region. And we're also providing for the stewardship of the environment in the region. Safety, security, and stewardship are the watchwords for the Coast Guard. And frankly, those mission priorities are not different than anywhere else in the United States. We're doing the same things elsewhere. But I think everyone understands that the missions, environment, and challenges of working here in Western Alaska and in the Arctic are very unique. So mostly what I'm going to talk about here today is, what we're doing now and what we're going to do in the future. But I thought it would be useful to talk about the past and the Coast Guard's past in this region as well, because I think from a Western perspective, we have a very rich past here. And that started in 1867 when the region became part of the United States. And I think, obviously history of the region is very well known, I'm sure, to many of the people that are online here tonight. But, I've learned a lot since I came up here about our own Coast Guard history here. One of the things that brought the Coast Guard to the Bering Sea and the Bering Strait region in the U.S. Arctic right after 1867 was actually the northern fur seal. I think 80% of the population of the fur seals each year return to the Pribilofs to breed and to pup. And the Russians had been harvesting fur seals for decades. And when the U.S. Moved in and the U.S. Acquired the territory of Alaska, it turned out that those harvests actually by other nations sort of started to spin out of control. So the Revenue Cutter Service, which is a predecessor to the Coast Guard, was actually sent to stop poaching and to bring the harvest of northern fur seals under control so that they were sustainable. So that was one of our first efforts to provide for stewardship, of the region. That actually ended in 1911 with a treaty called the Northern Fur Seal Treaty. And that was actually, I learned recently, that was the very first wildlife conservation treaty that had ever been signed in the world to protect stocks. Another important thing that we did, in the late 1800s was, of course, search and rescue. When we talk about maritime commerce through the region back in those days, we were talking primarily about whalers, and they were Yankee whalers. These were the offshore vessels that would come up and go through the Bering Strait, and they had a particular ability to get themselves stuck in ice. And there were a number of dramatic rescues that these Revenue Cutter Service crews did to rescue these whalers and get them out of the ice. So that was an important safety mission for us. Another thing, a real unique thing that the Coast Guard did for many years in the 1800s was it went over to Siberia and it bought reindeer, from the native people in Siberia who had a long tradition, of herding them, and brought them to coastal regions in Western Alaska and the Arctic and deliver that. And those herds grew and grew and grew locally and provided food security for decades. We provided medical crews. We brought medical crews to villages, and we prosecuted felonies that occurred: murder, theft, poaching of marine mammals. So back then we were performing safety, security, and stewardship missions. Today, we all know that the environment is changing in the region. I think it's obvious to everyone. It's also changing geopolitically. There's more focus on the Arctic than there has been in quite a long time. Of course, it's opening, as we say, to more commerce and natural resource development. It's also one location of a larger national and international competition that the U.S. has with other countries such as Russia and the People's Republic of China. So if I'm going to talk about what the Coast Guard's doing today in the Arctic, I kind of put them into two buckets. The first bucket are a number of what I'll call national security related activities that we're doing in the region. And I'm going to defer to Captain Brennell to talk about that. I'll put that in the parking lot for the moment. We have our largest cutters and aircraft patrolling our border with Russia. And we have unique capabilities and authorities to protect our sovereignty and promote the rules-based order. I'll just note, I'll let Captain Brennell talk about that at length, but I just wanted to say, in the theme of what's old is new, I think both Captain Brennell, myself, and Dave Seris you know, more than 20 years ago, we were patrolling our maritime boundary with Russia, keeping out the foreigners and protecting US fish stocks. So this idea of patrolling the border to protect our sovereignty is not new. The Coast Guard has been doing that for quite some number of years. The second category of missions and activities that the Coast Guard's doing in the region, I'll group together. I'll say that they're the delivery of our statutory missions. Those are search and rescue, marine environmental protection, law enforcement, and our marine safety related inspections and investigations. So I'm going to talk a little bit further about that grouping of activities that we're doing. First and foremost, we're providing search and rescue response capabilities to the region. For a number of years, we've been deploying helicopters to Kotzebue and then on shorter periods to other places in the region to bring our search and rescue capability closer to where the search and rescue threat is. That's not unique to the Arctic. We have deployable helicopters that we deploy to different places in Alaska throughout the year where fishing activity is greater and the search and rescue threat is greater. And one of the places we're doing that is up into Kotzebue. These search and rescue helicopters, you know, also support marine mammal research. They fly scientists on surveys and do things like that. In 2021, we saved 45 lives in the Arctic and in Western Alaska. I think in the Coast Guard, we're very proud of that. And then for 2022 in the area of search and rescue, we're certainly tracking on this Bering Strait Festival. And we're looking at that from a search and rescue perspective. We are seeking more information for that. It's not totally clear what that's going to look like right now. I think it's scheduled for August, but we're seeking more information on that. And we're looking at it from a search and rescue perspective and making sure we have the ships and aircraft that are available in the region to provide those services if we have to. Moving on to marine environmental protection. It's another huge mission of the Coast Guard. One of the big things that we're doing in that area is that we're inspecting the bulk oil facilities that are located in, I will say, all of the villages that dot the coastal areas and up the rivers, the major rivers in Western Alaska and the Arctic. Though that fuel that's delivered annually, you know, is of course vital to the life of the community, but it also represents a threat when it spills. It's both a threat to the village, you know, and also to the subsistence activities, of course, that if it gets into the coastal water. So we visited more than 100 communities in 2021 to inspect those. Now, the Coast Guard doesn't have complete regulatory control, and we only look at part of those facilities, but we're also, I can say, partnering with other agencies at the state level and at the federal level to pass on what we see and problems we have with facilities to these other agencies that perhaps will have resources and mission to provide support. For 2022, Rear Admiral Moore has directed us to redouble our efforts to promote the resilience of Western Alaskan communities to protect them against oil spills. I think you're going to see a pretty large oil spill exercise in Nome. We call that a prep exercise that's going to happen this summer. It's one that we do with industry and with OSROs, and there'll be some local training for responders involved in that. More to follow. That's managed by Sector Anchorage up in Anchorage. Another important initiative that we're doing, and we'll talk about that as we get to talk about the Russian traffic. We know that there's been an increase in Russian cargo traffic and LNG traffic, you know, on the Russian side of the border. We have actually a bilateral agreement with Russia that we've had for many years, and we're trying to lean into that initiative, and it's under what they call a joint contingency plan framework. And what it is, it's meant to be an agreement between United States and Russia over what we're both going to do in the event of a transboundary spill. We had fighting a bunch of problems. We were actually able to have an in-person meeting in Anchorage last September, where we advanced planning for what we were going to do in the event of a large oil spill. And we hope in 2023, and we expect to have an on-the-water exercise with the Russians to get at that transboundary oil spill threat. We think that's very important. In the marine safety missions, there's inspections that we do of the tug and barge industry that moves along the Alaska coast to deliver fuel and other supplies to the villages and to Prudhoe Bay. We inspect the foreign vessels that come in and out of the Red Dog mine to make sure that they're safe. And we investigate casualties that occur with those same vessels. You know, one of the important things about marine safety, our marine safety missions, is to promote what we call the safety and efficiency of the maritime transportation system, the MTS. That's a Coast Guard word. And one of the important things that we're doing, and I think Dave Seris is going to address this in more detail in his part, is we underwent, you know, probably 5-6 years ago, up until a couple years ago, a port access route study project for the Bering Strait and Bering Sea regions. That was successfully concluded, and we went with Russia and proposed voluntary two-way routes through the Bering Strait region. I think that's probably very familiar to many people that are on the line. I will say, looking forward, we're also now currently looking at extending, you know, those routes and that study project in the Alaska Arctic coast, you know, from the Bering Straits all the way over to Canada. Also, you can expect here in 2022 that the Coast Guard is going to continue to do boating safety training, ice rescue training, and oil spill response training in coastal communities to promote their resilience. In the area of law enforcement, we'll continue, as we have done for many years, boarding U.S. fishing vessels to protect U.S. fishing stocks and to make a level playing field amongst those fishery participants, and to promote the safety of fishermen. That's going to happen both offshore and we expect in Bristol Bay. And then finally, we expect Healy to be back up for the summer. They're in dry dock right now, and as they have for many years, they have a very full suite of science mission support that they're going to be doing. They'll be bringing a number of U.S. scientists up into the region to do their science work. So in conclusion, your Coast Guard will be active in 2022, providing the same support and services that we've been doing for 150 years in the region. Names change, priorities go up and down, the region evolves, but those services that the Coast Guard provides to residents and mariners are enduring, and so we'll certainly continue to be doing those going forward. Thank you very much. So, Captain Brennell?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And before I...
Do you want your slides?
Yeah, Gay, if you want to, go ahead and bring up that first slide.
Okay, stand by one.
And as that's happening, as we're waiting for that first slide to come up, I just wanted to thank Gay for this invite. Obviously, it's a pleasure for me to be here tonight with both Phil and with Dave, two absolute experts in the fields that we're talking about tonight. And it's neat to be part of this forum to talk to you about what Phil just kind of outlined in terms of what our role in the Arctic is, what we're trying to accomplish, and how that interacts with this group that's online with us tonight, but also what that means for the collective future of both our organization and the individuals online here. So I'm going to push a little bit of information, but I think one of our main goals here tonight is to hear from the collective that's online also. So we're excited about that part. So we won't spend a lot more time just pushing information. We'll get some ideas out there, some thoughts of ours and some background, and then certainly open it up for hopefully some robust Q&A and get into what I think this forum is really all about. So again, thank you, Gay, for the invite. And so as Phil laid out, things have changed for the United States Coast Guard to some extent in the last couple years in how we're operating in and around the Arctic, but it's not a holistic change by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of this has been going on for many decades, and really what we're seeing is our operations this past summer and in recent history in and around the Chukchi Sea are probably more of just an extension of what we're already doing in the Bering Sea along the U.S.-Russia maritime boundary line. So this first slide kind of outlines the foreign activity that we run into during the summer, mostly as we're operating in the area. And it kind of outlines that we're, as the title says, we're operating in a very strategically competitive and a strategically charged space. And how we talk about that depends on who we're talking about, right? Obviously, the United States has high interest in the Arctic, but so does Canada, an ally. But yet, I've got a picture here of a Japanese training vessel also interested in operating in the Bering Sea and around the Bering Sea in the near Arctic. So I'll go around the horn real quick on these pictures, kind of from left top, and I'll work my way around in a U shape until I finish on the right top. And so starting with the left, those first two vessels are pictures of two People's Republic of China vessels. And that was a surface action group that came over to strategically operate in international waters, well within their rights and the rights associated with operating in international waters. And they did so in the Bering Sea, mostly around the Aleutian Islands and south, basically, of the Donut Hole. And they actually split up at one point and were broken up into a couple different groups as they moved through the operating area there in the Bering Sea. And as fortune would have it, we had two of our newest cutters, national security cutters, working for the district. So we were able to intercept those vessels and shadow them and ensure that they were operating in accordance with international norms, which I can attest that they were. So it was a matter of meeting presence with presence. They push into a space that starts to creep into areas in which we have some concern, and we monitor that and let them know that we're there. As you work down to the bottom left, that's a picture of of one of our national security cutters operating with Russian border guard vessel Kamchatka. And that picture was taken up in the Bering Strait. So I'm sure there's folks that might be online here that were well aware of that opportunity that we had to work with that Russian border guard vessel. And that picture represents what I like to label as a very cooperative relationship in which we are collectively working towards the safety and security in the maritime environment for both nations. As you guys are well aware, in the region that you live in, this is very important to, I'm sure, you and the U.S. government, that we maintain a strong but a very cordial relationship to make sure that our national security needs are met. And by meeting our national security needs in that region, they often meet the national security needs of Russia also. So it's very cooperative. If it weren't for that relationship, there would have to be a larger resource allocation to the maritime boundary line if we couldn't count on the Russian border guard and the Russian government prosecuting vessels that were illegally operating in that vicinity. So we continue to have a great relationship with them, and I think you'll continue to see operations with the Russian border guard in the Bering Strait. As you work around to the bottom, that is the Chinese research vessel Zhuilong 2. They operate throughout the Arctic pretty consistently, and we want to meet them with presence also and pay attention to what they're doing. As you work to the right bottom, that is the Harry de Wolf, a Canadian naval vessel that we met up with and did some exercises with. And then just north of that is the Japanese training vessel Kashima, followed by the Sir Wilfrid Laurier, a Canadian Coast Guard vessel that we did some operations with, again in the Bering Strait. And then that is the Healy is the last picture there, which the Healy mixed it up with both the Sir Wilfrid Laurier and several other vessels and our own national security cutters. So a lot of activity in the region, a lot of foreign activity. And our goal as a U.S. Coast Guard, as the lead maritime agency in this arena, is to consistently meet presence with presence to ensure that everybody is abiding by international norms and rules of governance. So you'll continue to see that. That's what we did last year. I suspect this year will look very similar. We have goals associated with the operations we get after, and some of those goals that we met this past year included that we conducted both surface and air patrols along the U.S. and Russia maritime boundary line in support of regional maritime safety and security. We successfully patrolled within the Russian claimed northern sea route without challenge, and I offer that that's a result of that relationship that we have with the Russian border guard and how we're able to do that, because that patrol of the Chukchi Sea maritime boundary line supports safety and security in that region collectively. We provided presence to meet foreign activity. We monitored emerging Russian fishing activity in the Arctic. So we are absolutely aware that Russia has began to commercially fish in the Chukchi Sea. And that happened for the first time in modern history in this past summer. Russia kept us apprised of the fact that they were going to do that. They began selling quota, I believe, last spring. And then we saw, I believe it was 3 or 4 vessels actually operate and fish through the summer. And they even operated down into the Bering Strait on the Russian side within their own EEZs. So part of the reason we're up there is to monitor that and to ensure that no illegal fishing is being conducted in the Chukchi Sea on our side of the EEZ, and also to cooperatively report anything negative that we see on the Russian side to the Russians. So again, we improved our high latitude coordination and comms with DoD this summer, and we executed a communications protocol that we do every year with the Russian border guard. I'm sorry, Gay, I saw you waving your hand.
Quick interruption, and that is for people who may not be
You're
familiar with
muted.
the acronym. No, I'm not muted. For people who are,
Maybe we're just having technical difficulty.
can anyone else hear me?
Oh, I hear you now, Gay.
Okay, so and I'm sorry to interrupt, but for people who may not understand what the acronym EEZ is in this region, I think that's the exclusive economic zone, and that when you're saying that, you're talking about Russian waters on the other side of the border. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, so this is a
Okay,
great
thank you.
discussion. So it's very easy to get confused. I mean, we seem to sometimes talk past each other, even in our organization, on what we sometimes mean in terms of the language associated with the legalities. When you say Russian waters, U.S. waters, what do you really mean? So it is important to speak to exactly what that is, and that is what I mean. It's the exclusive economic zone, which goes out to 200 nautical miles in most places, but then is also, as you know, in the Bering Strait is kind of a split, and it runs as a split, not a true 200 nautical miles in the Chukchi, because you just can't get there as both nations butt up against each other. So that maritime boundary line that delineates the EEZ is for the use of resources, the exclusive use of resources. It has nothing to do with transiting or territorial seas or anything else. In fact, the EEZ is mostly international waters, so it falls under international rules and governance and norms, with the exception of the resource extraction piece. And I think when you talk about territorial seas, you're talking about something different. So a lot of times when you say Russian waters or U.S. waters, the majority of the time folks are referring to actual territorial seas.
And your map shows that. Is that the line in your figure that we're all looking at?
That's exactly right. So the white line, if you go down to the Bering Sea, there's a white line that says U.S. Russia MBL, and that stands for maritime boundary line. And as that white line runs straight up between the Diomedes all the way up into the Chukchi Sea, that is the maritime boundary line. That light blue line that is around the very edge of both Russia and Alaska, I believe that delineates actual territorial seas.
Thank
Does that
you so
answer your
much.
question, Gabe?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, no worries. And I'll just wrap up here, but just wanted to make it clear that, you know, we're up there for all sorts of goals associated with our multi-mission, you know, tasking. We're looking at search and rescue. We're looking at prevention missions. We're looking at law enforcement and national security missions. And we're attempting to achieve those goals by building partnerships with folks like the Canadians and the Japanese and with the Russian border guard, and even more importantly with ALCOM, the Alaska Command there, and then also NORTHCOM and EUCOM, right? The combatant commanders, the DoD side of things, which also touch this space. EUCOM reaches basically all the way over towards Wrangel Island and a little bit past that on the Russian side. And then NORTHCOM certainly kind of manages the space around the United States. So there's a lot of large entities that have interest, but at the end of the day, the U.S. Coast Guard is the maritime arm of the U.S. government that is consistently going to be in the Arctic now and in the near future. So with that, I'll wrap up my comments on the military activity, and I'm going to pass it over to Dave to talk a little bit more about the waterways management side of things, and then we can get back to questions. So thank you again, Gabe.
Thank you. And Dave, are you unmuted? That would be in the lower left. There's a microphone that has a slash in it.
Let me try that. Is that better?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. I was actually going to talk a little bit more about what Captain Brennell had mentioned, and a little bit of history on how this maritime governance system evolved with territorial seas and the, contiguous zones, and then later that 200-mile EEZ. Way that we like to talk about this is really a framework. If you look at this slide, I mean, you see a whole lot of different nations represented in the Arctic, and there are maritime rules that most of the world has agreed to abide by. So just a little quick history on how that evolved. The concept that we like to explain this easily is your maritime jurisdiction as you go further from the shoreline is kind of like a bundle of sticks. And when you cross over these various boundary lines, you put a couple of them down, and that's not something you can control anymore. But the first concept that a coastal state could, pretty much control its territorial waters, this goes back to the 1700s. It was sort of acknowledged that, 3 miles off your coastline, that was considered a coastal state's territorial seas. This is often referred to as the cannon shot rule, because the way it was enforced was you could have a cannon on a bluff and shoot at people to keep them away. And so that 3-mile territorial sea has really been a thing for hundreds of years, and coastal states are able to enforce the full range of their maritime laws within that region. The next concept was 12 miles out from shoreline, a contiguous zone or a customs zone. And this also came very early in the country. This is back in the late 1700s. I think Thomas Jefferson had a hand in it. And this was really legislation that got passed by Congress, I think in 1799, that allowed the U.S. to conduct boardings of foreign flag vessels out to 12 miles in order to enforce the nation's customs laws and trade laws. And the same authority actually carries on today to the Coast Guard. We inherited that from the Revenue Cutter Service. It allows us to do boardings for almost any purpose, customs, immigration, or enforcement of our own laws. Although normally you see customs and immigration are handled by other agencies, and usually when a vessel arrives in port. So that system continued for probably about another 150 years, where the high seas pretty much ended at 12 miles. and everything beyond that was high seas. But in the 40s and the 50s, as people started to look towards, other seabed resources and fisheries were becoming more of an issue, there was discussion about creating this 200-mile exclusive economic zone that allowed that coastal state to control what was happening out to 200 miles off of its coastline. And this is not impinging on vessels' general right to navigate on the high seas, but rather it's allowing a coastal state to manage or control seabed resources and fisheries. That was all sort of codified in 1958 at international negotiations that were conducted in Geneva, pretty much accepted worldwide. And our U.S. Congress didn't actually add on the fisheries component of that enforcement until about 1976. So we continue to see manifestations of that today as you look at distant water fishing fleets that were still actively patrolling along the U.S.-Russia border to make sure that they don't impede in our waters. This was further codified by the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, 1982, that most of the world's countries have accepted, but ironically, the U.S. has not done that yet. That's a treaty that would take full Senate ratification. And so the one other thing that happened since then that's pretty germane is that in 1988, the convention had kind of changed to where that 3-mile limit was extended out to 12 miles for a territorial sea. And then there's an additional 12-mile buffer zone outside of that is sometimes called the Contiguous Zone. In the U.S., that's really just kind of like a buffer zone around your territorial sea. And then you've got jurisdiction out to the full 200 miles. And as Captain Brennell alluded to, if you don't have 200 miles between two countries like we do in the Bering Strait, there are conventions on how different countries have agreed to draw those lines. Our boundary with Russia is still somewhat a disputed boundary, although it's, we've had a set of waypoints that we agree is the boundary line since about 1984. But again, that's, to formalize that type of a arrangement between two bordering states really would require a treaty, and we haven't ever actually even got there yet, although we've got customary enforcement along that maritime boundary line. And that hasn't been approved either by the Russian Duma or our U.S. Senate. It's just continues to carry on in its status quo. So the one other question you might have, you still see this 3-mile limit on the chart. What's that about if the territorial sea actually goes out to 12 miles? That really is sort of another story that has to do with state versus federal controls of state waters. It's assumed that when you create a state as part of the USA, that, part of that comes with, your ability to control the 3 miles off of your coast. This was challenged back in 1947 in California over who got to control oil and gas development and fisheries. And that discussion led to something called the Submerged Lands Act of 1953 that made it clear that, that those waters out to 3 miles and the seafloor resources and most of the fishing activity that happened in there was, that was managed by the state and not the federal government. And the federal government passed another law called OXLA, or Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, which is intended to let the federal government control the management of those seabed resources out to that 200-mile limit. So again, it's a bundle of sticks. When we look at activity on the water, if it's happening within 3 miles, it could be the state or the Coast Guard that has jurisdiction. Could be both of us, like the gold dredging you have up there in Nome. The state gets to regulate that. We get to do inspections on the vessels. The 12-mile limit for us kind of comes into that's the limit of your territorial sea. So if we're, say, chasing a foreign fishing vessel that we caught in our EEZ, if he can run and get inside the Russian 12-mile line, it's kind of out of our hands. We can't continue to chase him, and rather we tend to work through the State Department to sort that kind of thing out diplomatically. And so I guess the last thing that I would tell you is, keep in mind that also when you get into the high Arctic in Canada and Russia, there's also some conventions on how those baselines from where you measure that territorial sea, and Russia and Canada both make assertions that those are internal waters. or archipelagic waters, to where instead of going exclusively with 3 or 12 miles out from the coast, they're just saying this whole body of islands, we consider that to be all internal waters, and then they draw their baselines out from there. And that's something that the US and Canada and a lot of other countries don't necessarily agree with that, but it remains one of those issues that has not reached its final resolution. So if you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of show you how that starts to manifest itself when you look more specifically at what's coming through the Bering Strait. You know, you see trends like that purple line. Those are recreational vessels, most of whom are coming from Canada. And you see how they dropped off dramatically in the last 2 years. That's because Canada shut down passage of the Northwest Passage to anything other than commercial vessels due to COVID. So that's an example of Canada exerting those maritime jurisdictional claims, and it actually affects what you see happening in the Bering Strait. When they restrict traffic, then you don't see traffic. And you see other trends in here, like the growth in oil and gas vessels, and specifically these LNG tankers. Those are, you know, have continued for a number of years on the rise. And that's largely due to Russia building out their oil and gas exploration activities and relying on a fleet of purpose-built vessels that are making part of that transit through the ice and then transshipping, typically either in Europe or in China. So that was mostly what I had to say. I'd be happy to take questions on the port access route study. I guess that's the final mention I would have in this whole system of maritime governance, is that we want to control or try to impact the direction of traffic, even if it's well offshore. The easiest way for us to do this is to work through the International Maritime Organization and go, hopefully, with Canada and Russia to establish shipping lanes that then get promulgated on a worldwide vessel basis, in addition to, you know, hundreds of other ship routing measures that exist throughout the planet. And that's a sort of way to bring international order, so that, you know, all the ships that you see flying, all those different flags, if they're out on the high seas, if they're larger commercial vessels, they are typically following those ship routing measures. So that's the reason why we're working on the project up in the Beaufort and the Chukchi, to try to work towards the goal of, you know, getting some shipping lanes kind of notionally agreed to, and then hopefully getting them hydrographically surveyed to modern standards, and then to be able to go to IMO, with the goal being that down the road, that's going to help to route ship traffic further offshore, where it's going to cause less impacts to local resources. So with that, I would say, Gay, thank you again for putting this together. And I'll realize how much I miss talking to you folks up there. And it's been a great opportunity. And so I think we probably go to questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave Seris and Captain Brennell and Captain Thorne. So first off, the audience here, it's not easy to be a straight science speaker, and you guys have done a great job. And so we ask, you know, the audience to give a little love for the speakers, and before they start asking their questions. And let's see if we have a caller, see if they're still on. And so they will have, caller, if you can hear me, you have first crack at the Coast Guard to ask a question to them straight up. You'll need to unmute yourself, or I can do that at this end. I can only ask you to unmute. Does the caller want to ask a question? Okay. Well, caller, know that at any time, if you want to jump in, we will stop for the caller, because we know it's hard to be a caller on a Zoom. Not an easy thing. So thank you for participating. All right. I do want to point out that during the presentation, one of the first things that was pointed out, and it wasn't on the public chat, it was a private chat, just a reminder to the Coast Guard that the Coast Guard did run a life-saving station in Nome in the early 1900s. One small item that was left out, and kind of a big one for us, because we're, you know, Coast Guard. And so anyway, know that you guys did that too. You can put that on the list of things that were out here. And that has a unique history here and still remembered. So Wes Jones, we see you with your hand up. Wes knows how to run the Zoom calls really well. So Wes, we'll start off with you. And meanwhile, I'll check the chat box while you're asking your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for the information you all provided. I guess I was just and I understand some of this is not necessarily your jurisdiction, being that I'm going to ask about on the Russian side, but I guess interested in your thoughts. And my thing is that I work for Norton Sound Economic Development Corporation, and we're big in the fisheries here within the region, but also in the southern Bering Sea. But in the last several years, we've seen this drastic increase of fishing effort on the Russian side. They're currently, and we're at the same time we're seeing a number of issues in our region of salmon bycatch and just differences in the ocean. And so some of the impacts that the Russians may be having on the ecosystem with their big increase in fishing effort, we're having a really hard time getting information about what's going on there. So I'm guess curious to hear more about what you all are hearing, or and just to make a note that that's a big concern of ours here. And a few of the things that I'm concerned about are just the number of vessels, but they're here year round basically now. And then we're also seeing some indications of vessels, watching AIS, that their vessels are changing names often, which from what I hear is an indication of possibly some illegal activities. And then there's a couple vessels that appear that they have some ties to questionable fishing efforts other places in the world. So I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, Wes, appreciate that line of questions, and certainly a lot there to unpack. And like you led the question with, pointing out that we may not be the right agency to have all the information, but certainly interested in the question. One of the things that we do here, obviously, is not just domestic fisheries within the Bering and Gulf of Alaska, but from a law enforcement standpoint, we are super interested. And you may be aware that we have a new illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing strategy for the Coast Guard to fight and counter IUU fishing really throughout the world is how that strategy is written. So we are interested in learning more about illegal fishing, throughout the near Arctic and potentially in the future Arctic region. But I can't answer tonight, and mainly because I don't have the information on the data points that you're asking about. But we do have relationships with the Russian border guard, like I talked about, and conversations like this do come up. I will say that our relationship with them does provide us some information. They'll reach out to us when they have concerns with their own fleet and ask for information. And when we see things that don't look right, don't smell right, don't taste right, we will report to that to them. And we tend to see some level of action around that. But we're not deep into from a law enforcement standpoint at the 17th District Coast Guard. We are not deep into analyzing the vessels that are fishing on the Russian side. We count on Russia to do that piece. Now, that could bleed over in other areas. You may be aware we do operate every year in an operation called North Pacific Guard, which we typically send a cutter and some aircraft over to an area between. It's a very large swath. I mean, it basically covers everything in the North Pacific Fisheries Commission, which stretches from Japan to almost Hawaii, all through the North Pacific. So we cover a lot of ground over there. So as we run into Russian fleets south of the Aleutian Islands as we're patrolling. We're certainly interested in that. And I will say we are collecting information on things that are going on in that region, not just Russia, but Russia, China, to some extent, Japanese fleets. And as those fleets shift with the shifting environment that we're very aware of here in the Bering, but it's going on throughout the world and certainly in the North Pacific. As they get closer and closer to the Aleutian Islands, we pay attention to that too. So a lot there that I'm kind of throwing out there, and it's all tangential, but it's just to answer that we're not deep into it the way that you asked the question, but we are paying attention, and we do have some granularity on some of the illegal activity that could or could not be going on, and we talk to the Russians about that.
Wes, does that answer your question? He's muted. All right, and I'm going to just go to the chat for a second, because right along the same lines, there's Bob and Vera Metcalf. Do we have access? And again, just to give the Coast Guard speakers that we're in the Bering Strait region, so we share everything. All our marine resources are no longer sort of Russian stock or US stock. Everything is really tight here. So the question is, do we have access to the bycatch reports of Russian fishing? We've been learning about marine mammal bycatch by the Russian fleet in the Chukchi. And most recently, interestingly, since November, we've gotten video footage from across the other side of walruses that are bycatch in Russian trawl pollock activity, trawl boats. And so, that's something we're not used to seeing. And we have, of course, right now there's fishing off Cape Navarin, and here it is mid-January. And of course, the walruses have come down to spend the winter where they should, here in their winter home. And I think maybe that's just a take home for you guys. If you can't answer if we have access to bycatch reports by Russian fishing, that's the question, I guess. Can you answer that? And if you can't, know that this is something that obviously people are writing in about and have really big questions. Everything's so compressed here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gay, and to Bob and Vera, appreciate that question. And Gay, I think you nailed it. It's not, again, not something that we have immediate access to. Certainly, we can reach out to our NOAA partners, and I'm sure you folks are aware that there's a lot of coordinating commissions. The ICC is one example of international coordination for fishing sustainability, and there's other things like that between the governments and that manage those highly migratory species, not just with Russia, but with other countries too. So, but again, we don't have that granularity. It's not something that, from a Coast Guard enforcement standpoint, that we're really dialed into. I mean, even within our own domestic fleets, I'll use that as kind of an example. We know that there's bycatch concerns, right? And depending on what sector of fishing you're talking about, there's certainly different thoughts and opinions about that data. And we stay aware of that stuff, but aware only to be in tune with the fishing fleets for when we conduct boardings in order to enforce the laws that we're able to enforce, right? So if there's not a connection to the U.S. Coast Guard for an enforceable law or regulation, i.e. a foreign country in their own waters, then we start to lose our granularity on what's actually happening. Doesn't mean that we couldn't get it if we sought it, but we just don't have that information right now. Well,
if the Russians ask, what are we wanting to know? Now you know. At least in this region, that's a lot of things we are really curious about, and bycatch is no small thing to us in this region.
No, well received, and thanks for that.
You bet. Charlie's been, Dave, I saw your hand up. You were a speaker. Did you want to answer to a question?
I think I somehow have myself on mute. I'm hoping you can hear me now, but I'm standing by.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Your hand's raised, but that's okay. It's great. Charlie's been very patient. Charlie, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thanks. I'm mostly retired these days, but I've been active in emergency response and fisheries management biology for 40 years. Wanted to say I really appreciate the Coast Guard as a resource, especially when I was doing the search and rescue thing, because call up and get expert advice on medical or SAR or whatever, and always well delivered, not demeaning. I wanted to bring up something, kind of tag on to what Wes said. In the mid 70s, the Japanese longline fleet followed the Bering Sea herring up the coast of Alaska every spring and fished it hard. And the 12-mile limit existed, of course, but that was only something they worried about when there was a presence. And so most of the time they got in clear into the 3-mile line. And in 1978, I may be off a year, but I believe it was 1977 or 78, the fishing game biologist who was my predecessor and later my boss went out in an 18-foot Lund skiff and sighted 200-foot longliners near Stebbins. And that initiated an action that shut down the Japanese longline fleet chasing Alaskan herring. And basically there hadn't been sufficient presence to drive them away. And whether it's just coincidentally or cause and effect, in 1981, the herring harvest in Norton Sound went from 1,000 metric tons to about 6,000 metric tons for the next 20 years. So it was unsustainable fishing going on in the 70s and more sustainable management in later years. The reason there's not a herring fishery today has more to do with market than with population. There's still a lot of herring. But it's really important to have a presence, and it's particularly important to make that presence known. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but that's an actual example in our region that made a huge difference. And I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Hang on one second, Peter. There is also another comment in the chat, and this may be one for the Coast Guard as well. And thank you, Charlie, for your thoughts. And to the Coast Guard in the chat box, also, there is a worry about excessive concern about indigenous marine mammal hunting that might be close to the border. So this is really a Bering Strait issue. Food security is real to our communities, and it is likely that pursuing and properly harvesting marine mammals, especially bowhead, and there's plenty of other marine mammals being harvested at sea, might require boats to approach the border. So there isn't a question there, but I think that's getting at, for the Bering Strait, again, we're compressed. We have that maritime border there. We understand that there's rules of engagement regarding harvest commercially, and that there's certain things we have to abide by. Is there any way you can address the issue of indigenous non-commercial acquisition of marine resources with the border in the Bering Strait region? It is really a difficult situation, especially for the island communities where the border bumps up against within a quarter mile of the community. And that's in the chat. There's no specific question, but I think people want to mention that.
So
the
can you hear me?
excessive concern. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can address that a little bit. I've worked up here, for a long time and observed and kind of seen our communications with the Russians, a good bit. I certainly, I think here in Juneau, we share those concerns. There is, that activity, that subsistence activity needs to be supported, and I think the Coast Guard, certainly does what it can in a lot of different ways, right, to allow, it's not for us to allow, but, to do, promote safety and to let that happen. I will say that, I think one thing that we've observed in the last few years is, the border guard, is spending a lot of time in the Bering Strait region now, right? We see them with our own cutters. They're there more than they used to be. We don't have good visibility why. I mean, they're making their own decisions with their own, vessels, but, they are there. And, they have communicated to us over the years that, border crossing is, a big deal for them. We've heard that from them, in recent years a lot in general. That is of concern to them, right? And they've got vessels there to watch, and it is their waters, and we certainly have a good working relationship with the Russian border guard, over certain issues that we see eye to eye on, right? Us and Russia, we have a narrow relationship that we work with them on things, like search and rescue and fisheries enforcement and things. So that doesn't answer the question, and it certainly doesn't answer the concern, but I thought I would add that, that's to the extent that I understand it, where their mind is and where they're, putting resources. So I think it's something that should be of concern. Thank you.
Yeah, you're getting a bad feedback there. All right, thank you very much. Anybody else have a comment on that issue? Okay, so Peter, go ahead, ask your question. Peter's with the Gnome Nugget, and then we'll go to the chat box again. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for everything. I'm formerly a military reporter in Washington, D.C. Now I've come up here, so I get to needle you both with big picture and little picture questions. Was really interested both by something that Wes asked and then a response that now retired Captain Thorne, I hope I got that right, said. So I'm kind of gonna try and ask two questions at once, and I apologize for that. Wes said something really interesting about changing names, illegal activities, and so on. And so I was curious as to all of the flags in the image that you showed. I mean, you have ships that are clearly named Russian names, but flying under the flag of the Bahamas or Hong Kong. So I'm wondering how much you track that. Am I being heard? Sorry, I hear, or I see people.
Sure,
Okay.
We can hear you.
Great, sorry. So I wanted to know how much, how much flag tracking, how much that seemed, as an investigative reporter, that seemed like a really interesting thing to want to dive into. How are these vessels being tracked? How much can you really track them? And then kind of tied to something a minute ago about, do you ever get the impression that there is, oh, the Russian border guard says, sorry, that's not a Russian ship, we can't do anything about it. Do you ever feel like there's kind of malicious changing of names or registration of the boat to a different country so that they can't do anything about it, even though it's clearly Russian? And then
Sorry, Peter, I hit the wrong button. I was trying to get your attention, but I ended up muting you. I just want to give him a break to answer some of those, because there was like, I stopped. I just got a call. Relevance trying to join in, but you were at two questions when I left off, so I just wanted to give it.
Sorry,
a break.
it was only supposed to be one. But the other one,
and you were going for a third, so I just wanted to stop
totally
for a second.
connected.
I didn't mean to mute you. I didn't mean to mute you.
Kind of the bigger, harder question, Mr. Thorne, you just said, border crossing is a big deal to them. To put it politely, territorial sovereignty is not something that Russia is currently particularly interested in. The president said today he expected Putin to invade the Ukraine. And so I'm wondering if issues in the that are very far from here, how is that going to spill out into the Bering Sea? are we going to start seeing, okay, the Russians are going to start coming a little closer? Are they going to start getting more of our bycatch? Are they going to start?
So Peter, thank you very much. Let's give the speaker time to the speakers time to address some of that. Go ahead.
Hey, Peter, absolutely appreciate all those questions. I'll see if I can keep track of them in my head, but quickly to the name changing thing and the concerns of nefarious activity being protected by the Russian border guard. Certainly vessels can change names, and certainly vessels can change flags. There's certainly rules associated with that, but to the extent that it's nefarious, I would be surprised, especially in Russian waters, and along the maritime boundary line there. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen. It could absolutely happen. And we do track those things. We are paying attention. The Russians are also paying attention. But the benefit there, as you start to do the forensics on it, there's not a lot of benefit when you're talking about fishing in Russian waters with a Russian company under another flag, right? And those flags are flags of convenience for all kinds of reasons. But as you drift further south into that operation I was talking about with North Pacific Guard, and into an area that isn't managed by a singular state like Russia or the United States, and it's in international waters, I would offer there's probably much more nefarious stuff going on with countries like China, and the name changing there, AIS changing, IMO numbers changing, flags changing, with PRC crews on board consistently, and trying to keep enforcement entities kind of sideways on what they're actually trying to achieve there. And we know that the distant water fleets of China are out there to basically pillage the resources, right? So that's more of a concern, to be honest with you, than some names changing on vessels that are monitored by Russia and waters that are managed for sustainability by Russia. So, and I would offer that when we have seen issues and we have contacted Russia, the response is always very positive in my mind. They actually, like some countries that we report incidents to, we may never hear anything about it. But when we report something to Russia, we get feedback on that. And a lot of times it's, hey, we held them accountable, we fined them this much, and here's what we found through our investigation. So again, very cooperative. All right, so now jumping into the bigger question, right? The whole Ukraine piece associated with what that might mean for out here. Certainly we stay in contact with our EUCOM partners and our NORTHCOM partners, but for us, we concentrate on our relationship with the Russian border guard, but we don't do that in a bubble. We do that tied in with our Coast Guard headquarters, with our Pacific area, and those folks are well tied in with National Security Council and White House to understand where our relationship may fit to benefit national security for the United States, and where it may need to be tailored in order to meet larger objectives for what we may be trying to accomplish on a grander strategic kind of view. Can you turn yours up?
So Peter, I'm going to jump in too and just say that if it helps, because you're new and it's good. We have the big US and Russia governments, but know that this Bering Strait also has a different level. We're a neighborhood. The Seward Peninsula and Chukotka have many, we share a lot of things: the weather, people, kin, blood, language, and the animals, the food, traditions. So know that there's multiple levels of Bering Strait. One time, it's a neighborhood, we try to keep peaceful. And at the other time, we sort of have these other, like the parents come in the room, and then you have to, hopefully they get along. That helps. Dean, I see your hand up. Peter, do you have, I know you'll have probably another question, and we're welcoming you to have that. Are you okay for right now?
Absolutely, absolutely. Come back to me.
Okay, we'll come back too, because and then Dean, hang on one second, because someone's asking in the chat, curious if the proposed Nome port expansion would have any impact on Coast Guard presence. That's a big question for us in Nome.
Yeah, Gay, so I'll field that question. So
Okay.
I think we're certainly tracking very closely the plans to expand the port in Nome. And, we've gone on the record, with the Army Corps of Engineers, in their very deliberate process and, and what they do to plan the port and the approval process. We've communicated to them, and I think we've said many times externally that if there's a port that is built in Nome, the Coast Guard ships, will certainly use that. We use all the facilities that are available to us. Right now, we mostly use Dutch Harbor. We'll treat, and anybody can look at a chart and see how much further Dutch Harbor is away, than Nome. So we certainly we use Nome now, right? The existing port in Nome, Alex Haley, and below can tie up in Nome, and then the larger cutters, anchor off. So we would use it moving forward. I think that it would allow us to be, deployed further north, more often and not have to go to Dutch Harbor as much. I think that would be very, convenient and useful to the Coast Guard. I don't think, my opinion, when we deploy, assets that up there, our ships and aircraft and our personnel, we do that on a seasonal basis. We talk about it being mobile and seasonal and scalable. We're always moving our resources around the state. We don't have enough resources to park them in any one particular place all the time. So many of our resources are moving around to the threat. So I think that you'll continue to see that seasonal presence. We know that the shoulder seasons are growing, and that presence, in time needs to grow because the, breakup is earlier, and then, it's open water later in the year each year. So I think you'll still see us mobile and seasonal, in the region, and we'll certainly use the port if and when it's built. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And just as a check-in, all three of you speakers, are you guys okay? Because it's like 7:45, and I think we'll keep going as long as you want to. But we know you're on extra time now, and plus it's evening. But are you guys okay to still take questions? Thumbs up.
Yeah, Gay, we've got a little bit more time.
Okay, wonderful. Because we have a lot of questions, and I haven't even gotten to ask my questions. So we'll have Dean Stockwell. You've been waiting. And no, actually, sorry, Dean. I just want to say that we still have the caller online. And caller, if at any time you want to ask a question, just jump right in and start talking, and we will stop and get your question answered. With that, go ahead, Dean.
So first of all, I want to thank all the Coast Guard representatives. I appreciate you reaching out to us tonight. I'm a research scientist, a longtime co-worker and user of Coast Guard platforms. I date back to the cutters Glacier and Burton Island, if that strikes any bells. I've sailed on the Healy. My concerns tonight come from the increased vessel traffic during the Arctic period, or during the winter periods now. I'm concerned with people safety while they're out traveling on the ice, while they're hunting on the ice. I'm concerned with environmental maintenance. There's a lot of trash showing up now in the Bering Strait region. I'm worried about food security. A lot of these icebreakers that are breaking the way for tankers, LNGs, and the rest are actually being able to strike marine mammals, whether they're polar bears or seals nesting in the ice. And I'm worried about all types of marine mammal safety during the winter hours. Coast Guard is great during the summer. great during the spring. Their presence in the winter, however, is severely lacking compared to what the Russians have as capability. And I just want your thoughts on increasing our fleet and having a capability or a presence during the winters up in the straits, up in the Bering Sea, for potential oil spills and any type of disaster that can happen, because it'll happen eventually. And I just want to know your thoughts on how we get that done. Thank you.
Yes, Dean, thank you very much for that question. I think the Coast Guard, certainly shares your concerns, many of the concerns that you just expressed. We certainly do. And I think we'd be the first ones to say that our ability to project our presence and be there in ice conditions in the winter is very limited now. We have two icebreakers. One of them is I want to say a 45 or 50-year-old heavy icebreaker. One of them is a newer medium icebreaker, Healy. And we've identified for years, and we've been—
They haven't even told us about Arctic Shield. I'm going to hit them with—
capitalizing those
22.
icebreaker fleets so that we can project more effective and more often a presence outside of the free water time. We have a polar security project that is far along. It took years to launch it. We've gotten $1.8 billion from Congress to build the first two polar security cutters. They will launch in the middle of this decade, and then later. We're on the record as saying that we need, 6, icebreakers to fully meet the mission needs, both down in Antarctica and then up here in the Arctic. So we're working towards that day that we'll have a more persistent presence in the winter and we'll be able to work in the ice better. So the good news is, in 5, 6, 7 years from now, we should see that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I thank you for
And
that.
Phil, if you don't mind, I'll jump in just to make one addition, and along with what you've already laid out in terms of the hardware and the preparations for the future. Some of what you may have seen up in the Arctic this past summer with our national security cutter, one of our newest wide hull ships, working with the Healy. And that's by design to integrate what you may be aware of, Dean, having sailed on some of the ships up there, a very science-focused kind of mission set for our ice-breaking fleet, right? Which is way different than the things that I heard you list there in terms of oil spills, national security, food security, those kind of things. So we need to continue to work towards integrating our future officers and petty officers and crews to understand all these different mission sets. So you'll see us continue to do that into the immediate future as we prepare for the polar security cutters and the potential Arctic security cutters.
Thank you for that. Appreciate the answers.
All right, thank you, Dean. And Jeannie, you're up at bat, and then I'm going to ask my question because I'm dying to hear about 22. But go ahead, Jeannie.
Are you meaning me, Gay, Jenny with Indigenous?
Jenny, go ahead. Yes,
Oh, that's
go
okay.
ahead.
I don't know if there was someone, Jeannie, on the line. First of all, Gay, thank you for your series, and thank you to the Coast Guard for all of you guys do, and for this update on the work in the Bering Strait region. I reported for the Nome Nugget last fall, and one of the stories I covered had to deal with the Bering Strait Festival. And I believe it was I'm looking at my notes here. The retired Captain Phil Thorne gave an update about the Bering Strait Festival, seeking answers to that. At the time we reported on it, there was very little information. And I'm just curious who the Coast Guard has contacted in search for any kind of its updates. And then my second question is, this festival is slated for August 2022. And I'm just curious to understand what the conditions are in that Bering Strait region from Chukotka to Wales for what this festival is slated for. What are the conditions that are somewhat predictable at that time of year? Thank you so much.
I'm going to jump in and just to give some background on that Chukotka festival. What was it called again? It has an official title.
It's called the Bering Strait Festival.
Bering Strait Festival, and this is being sponsored, I think, or put on or by the Chukotka Tourism or an individual.
It's
right?
being put on, it's hosted by the Russian Federation of Tourism. And it is in collaboration with a US kind of liaison, Emil Porcelain, who also is a musher, but she, it's meant to be a cross-cultural exchange, bridging together that family that you spoke of, Gay, the kind of cross-border relations that exist in the Bering Strait, from indigenous families that have been separated by the border over, the decades. The part of this festival will entail a sealskin race from Chukotka to Wales in August. And there's very little information. When we reported on it in November, including from the State Department. We checked around with the Russian Federation itself, who affirmed that they were the host organizer, and we haven't heard back from them yet. And we did check with the Coast Guard at that time as well. And there's time for this event to take place, but obviously time moves pretty fast.
And there's
Okay.
a lot of
Go ahead, Gabe.
questions because this is public. This is on Facebook and they're asking for people to register, and it's very official looking, and there's a lot of questions and concerns. So yeah, please, any information on this. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, we're certainly aware of it. I
Okay.
think more than likely, I just heard more information. It sounds like you're very, very in tune with what this is. From what we've looked into, we found that it appears to be private organizations. We pushed it to State Department on multiple different occasions to ask questions about it. We've reached out to our Customs and Border Patrol partners throughout Alaska to ensure that they were tracking, because certainly this poses some questions associated with border issues and making sure that all the correct clearances have been met and those kind of things. So from our standpoint, what we understand is State Department has decided that from a U.S. government standpoint, this is not a U.S. government supported event. So that leads me in a direction of the entities that are trying to organize this need to reach out and do the due diligence to ensure that there are no hiccups with the two different governments that could be in an enforcement presence on this. And from a U.S. Coast Guard standpoint, the way we're looking at it is mainly from what you indicated in part of your question was, what's the weather going to be like? What's it going to look like that time of year? How many people is this going to be, right? So we're also diving into some of this research to understand this from a potential search and rescue standpoint, because that would be a concern for us. And luckily, it's at a time of year when we are planning on having presence in that area anyway. So this is one thing that we can an event that we can add into our planning and continue to do research on as we get more information. And then we'll be in the vicinity anyway. We'll have Kotzebue stood up for 2022, and we will also have ships in the area.
Thank you very much for that update. Thank you.
Yeah, that is actually really great to hear, because that's a tricky stretch of water from Wales to Llewellyn, which is, I think, the intended course. So, all right, I'm looking at the chat. Not a question, just a comment, I think. So any other questions or the caller? I know I want to ask about Arctic Shield 22. it was on the flyer, and I'm just wondering, when should we see you come up, and what are the plans for this coming summer? Quickly, I guess, because it's late.
Yeah. So Gay, yeah, I'll answer that. I did cover, you know, in my little in my remarks earlier, I did kind of highlight the, you know, the big things that we're going to be doing there in different mission areas. I think they're in Nome. I think you're going to see you're going to see that what's kind of new and different for this year is there's going to be a, you know, a significant oil spill exercise that's going to happen up there. I don't have the dates for it, that we'll be working with industry on. I think that'll be, you know, a different activity than what you've seen in the past. You'll certainly see, you know, the helicopters. They are often coming down from Kotzebue to Nome, right? And they are picking up, you know, their marine, you know, marine mammal scientists and flying. I think you're plugged in on that. You're going to see our marine safety people doing what they've done in years past to, you know, visit outlying communities and do the bulk oil facility inspections and try to, you know, harden them, you know, so to speak. And you're going to see cutters like pull in and out there as they have in years past, or anchor off
Okay.
if they're too big to get to the dock, as we do our offshore work. So I think you're going to see much of the same activity that you've seen in years past in the region. And then I think that oil spill exercise is something that's different.
All right, well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to all of that in the summer ahead. The comment, there is a chat. In the spring of 2014, there was a magazine type publication devoted to Project Arctic Shield. The articles covered a wide range of topics pertaining to the project or your Arctic Shield. Are there any current publications available? I used them in high school ELA class to cover, quote, reading for information. The students found the articles to be of high interest. So is that something, is Arctic Shield putting out anything that we could maybe utilize for the teachers and school children here?
I'll speak to that. So we do put out, I think primarily, somebody's holding up a proceedings magazine there. You know, we do put out press releases. I would direct your attention to one, and I think that Lieutenant Commander McCann can certainly help with that. We put out an extensive description of what Sector Anchorage did. As it was a very long press release that had a bunch of information about all the work that they've been doing, mostly on the marine safety side. There in the Arctic. That was a long form press release that was done. We are providing information from time to time to the public on that. I don't think that we have a consolidated, you know, public publication on those efforts, but I would invite anybody who wanted to contact Lieutenant Commander McCann, and we're certainly willing to, you know, provide information on the activities we do. We love to talk about the work that we do. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. I know
Does that answer the
that's
question?
interesting. Yep, I think so. And that was of great interest to the kids, the youth here in the region. Thank you, the chat box. Thank you, Megan. Thank you from Megan to answer her question. And that was obviously of great interest to the youth here. All right, Peter, your hand is still up and we're kind of winding it down. Do you have a question, or is that just a?
Mostly just because I still left it up, but
Okay.
Glad to hear that they look forward to sharing such things. And Lieutenant Commander McCann, I actually reached out to Kodiak before I took this job saying, hey, I'm a military reporter. I spent a lot of time on base. If you head up towards Nome, I'd love to get out with you guys. So I do look forward to hearing about those oil spills and any kind of other things you have happening in the region. So thanks so much to everyone. Drill. Yeah, I don't look forward to the oil spills in the region, but
we will hope they never happen.
Okay,
I'm
glad
Peter.
we established that relationship. That's great. And then just for everybody's edification, I'm going to get the link to that news release about MSTF, and I'll post that in the chat. And then, Peter, as you have questions, you have our contact information. Then I'll share mine with Gage so that you have it as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Looking forward to working with you.
Mm-hmm.
Last but not least, do you guys want to mention at all what's happening in the Strait tonight? I mean, it's sort of that January unusual. It's unusual for us to see this kind of traffic we're having. I don't know if you want to address that.
Sure, I'll address that real quick, Gay.
People might be curious.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw some of the emails that you sent this morning. So again, I like the fact that we've got open communications with the region, and some of that gets funneled to you, and then you funnel it to us. But we're willing to take that kind of reporting from through our command center too, and Scott can certainly provide the information on how to get in contact with our command center. But what you're talking about is the LNG, the merchant traffic, all Russian, moving through the Bering Strait, but also, again, I think what caught some eyes associated with this event is where they were at, and how they crept closer to St. Lawrence, and were kind of hauled up kind of in the ice for a short period, not making a lot of speed, basically waiting for timing to go through the Bering Strait and waiting for some of the icebreaker capability that was coming down south. So they kind of, because of weather and because of ice, they drifted over into, again, still in international waters, but into the U.S. side of the exclusive economic zone. So again, that line gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't necessarily deserve all the attention, right? So the fact that they were in that vicinity doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot from an international rules and an international norm standpoint. But being that it's something different, we're always looking for a clear maritime domain awareness, right? So it takes a village. It takes both our electronic capabilities, our hardware capabilities to fly out and see things, and it takes folks on the ground to report things. So we certainly welcome those reports from St. Lawrence. We welcome those reports from Little Diomede. We welcome those reports from Nome in order to understand what's actually happening. And we, as a Coast Guard, reached out to Russia to try to understand what was happening too with that, to make sure they weren't in distress. And we confirmed that they weren't in distress, and we confirmed what I said earlier in this answer, and that is that they were just hauling up for a short period of time, getting out of some of the heavier ice, waiting to head north again.
Thank you for that explanation, and I think that is great, and the Coast Guard was very responsive to people's questions out here. I think that the real interest was that of the 4 vessels we currently have between Diomede and St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait tonight, the small one is the Arctica, Russia's largest and newest 567-foot nuclear icebreaker, and that's the smallest. That's the small one right now in between these 2 islands. So that's something that we're not used to seeing in mid-January, much less those kind of size vessels in the strait. So anyway, we just find it really interesting right now, and looks like there's another icebreaker coming down through the Chukchi. So I guess we're open here in January.
And we're tracking that. We talk about it on a daily basis. We're paying attention to what's moving through there. So we're aware of it. I think what we're seeing and what you're seeing is what Russia has promised. They've been talking about this for some time, and they've built out their icebreaking capability. They've built out their LNG capability, and now they're exercising it as a funding stream. And they're maintaining a presence in the Bering Strait while it's open with Russian border guard to manage that. So I think what we're going to continue to see is exactly what we're seeing now, and the growth that you're talking about and that you're worried about.
So I just want to say thank you, because again, the Coast Guard was really responsive, quick, and it's reassuring to everyone to know that your eyes are on those vessels and you have an eye up here. And you also are talking to us tonight. So not a lot of agencies will do that, and we are very appreciative. I am very appreciative. I'm still getting thank yous. And I guess my last question is, what do you need, Coast Guard? What do you want us to report to you? What kinds of things are of interest to you? How do we help you help us?
Gay, I think our relationship needs to continue to grow, right? And just like all things, as we partner up, we want you guys want more from us and we want more from you, right? So I think it's one of those things where we just continue to build that relationship through communications, through good partnership. Obviously, the more you understand our role and the more that we understand your stances and your livelihoods helps, our agency to do our job even better. I think folks understand that through things like Arctic Shield, through our Arctic Strategic Outlook, our strategy, we are taking the Arctic extremely serious and have been for quite some time. I think you see other agencies come to the U.S. Coast Guard to benefit from that knowledge, but we by no means think of ourselves as the true experts. Obviously, we look north to that, and so this relationship that we have with folks like you, the relationship that we're building with folks like the village in Little Diomede. We sent 2 ships there this past year to stop by and see how things were going, and then found out that we had the opportunity to inspect a tank that was there, and sent our sector folks in Anchorage who had that expertise out there to do that. You can just see over the years how this relationship continues to build and benefits both the Arctic region and of Alaska and the U.S. Coast Guard. So I would say, growth is what we need, continued growth in that relationship, and the communications that you guys are demonstrating already are exactly in line with where we want to take that.
All right. Again, thank you so much. Caller, any last chance for the caller? And there is a comment. Good discussion and appreciate the U.S. Coast Guard providing this. I have to bail, but want to share that the $250 million in IIJA funds announced today in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer WRDA work plan means phase 1 of Nome's port expansion is now a reality and will be constructed. Please contact myself. This must be Joy Baker. Please contact myself or Lucas if there are any questions on this project, and we look forward to continuing and enhancing our longstanding partnership with the U.S. Coast Guard. So that's from the Port Director from the City of Nome.
That's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's the official title of the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Awesome. Thank you for knowing that acronym. I'm lost on those, but so thank you very much, Peter. So know that hopefully the Coast Guard knew that, but that is some news for Nome. Joy's gonna send the article directly, and I can share it with you if you want that. And people can subscribe to the news releases on that site and get them emailed directly to you.
I can speak to that.
Oh,
Gay.
I'm sorry, that's you. I was just.
Yeah, we have a website that the Coast Guard uses with the DFE, and right now it's not working the way that it should. So I went to go look, so I could just send you guys a link, but some of the articles that we post aren't getting put up there. So I emailed it directly to you, Gay, so you can share it with people. And then also they'll eventually get that fixed. But in the meantime, if you want to sign up to receive our news releases, you just go to that site and then say that you want to receive District 17 news releases. And anytime we send something out, it'll go right to your email.
Can I put your email address in the chat box right now? And that way people can email you.
Yep, that works too.
All right. Stand by one. If I can do that.
Lieutenant Commander, were you talking about DVIDs?
DVIDs is one thing, but I was talking about GovDel.
Oh yeah, those are really fun. A lot of those.
There is a bunch of good information out there. Yeah, and normally there's like a historical log of all the articles that we have sent out. But when I just looked at it, the one that I was looking for is not on there, and that's a known issue up at a level above the Coast Guard. So they're working on it. But for the meantime, if you sign up, you'll get it. Or if you just email me, we can make sure that you get it.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. And with that, thank you, Coast Guard. And